And we're live. All right.
Hello.
So
Hi, everybody.
I have one more thing to say about projects before we move on. So we talked about projects, the sense of how we use them to change the game world. They also exist to change the character. This is this game's form of XP. The
Hmm.
thing is, you're supposed to declare what you want to change about your character before you start the project. So we didn't really do that too well, but it's a way for like the players to say, well, I want my domain score to go up, or I want to become Durant, and then they say, so there's this thing I noticed about my character. I noticed that they're uncomfortable in, maybe they're uncomfortable in social situations, and the GM will ask a question back, like, I don't know, but that's how it's supposed to work, and
I
Hmm.
see.
you're supposed to get XP not in terms of points, but in terms of, you know, fictional or actual changes to your character sheet directly.
I see. We did not play it like that, and I did not know that.
Hmm.
Yeah. I didn't do it
Yeah.
correctly. And part of that is just because I just don't play this game too often.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. And there just aren't that many actual plays of it as well. Like it's hard to
Yeah.
you just can't find that many ways to like watch people play it and pick up the rules from that, or pick
Yeah.
up like different rules that you didn't notice at first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming probably many of them are playing it for the first time like we are, and so they're
Hmm.
probably messing some stuff up like we did.
And plus,
Hmm.
Hey,
last time
that
I played this, I just played for 8 months without making a single project.
Right.
These things are totally optional. And
they are.
you don't feel left out of the game if
Hmm.
you don't do them.
How did your character sheet change in terms of
Nope.
anything? Okay.
I
Neat.
think I reordered some estate properties and
Hmm.
bonds and afflictions, and I took some wounds, but those things change without projects.
Hmm.
Okay.
The thing that I wanted to say about projects just before we move on, and Will, this is something that like has to do with you as well, is like I think I was the first person to complete a project, and so like took the first swing at like manifesting them in play. And the way projects work is you set yourself a goal, and then when you accumulate enough points to resolve the project, you get to like speak an imperial miracle into the world. And so, Will, you and I had a really interesting exchange where, like, I was trying to use it in one way, and you were like, no, I want you to use it this other way, which was totally fine. But it's an interesting when we talk about this game being very free form. Like, it literally does not give you a rule or an example about like what you're supposed to like what a project is supposed to be.
Hmm.
Right? They have
It's
a they have a couple of sentences, and that's it. And so like that
it's
part of it where it's like it really is a negotiation at the table,
yeah.
is interesting.
Yeah, and I have something else that just occurred to me that I will say later because it's not. We'll just go through the individual mechanics. It's not about
Mhm.
projects, more it's about negotiation and how the aspect of negotiation in this game compares to the previous games we've played.
Totally.
Um, if we're all ready to move on, then the next thing we're going to talk about is the mechanics, bonds and afflictions. Now, bonds and afflictions are you have a part of your character sheet that are called bonds and afflictions. They are very similar and related, but two technically separate things. When you have a bond, this is something that your character cares about, that your character has a bond with, that is a part of their character. And an affliction is kind of similar, but more of that it affects them more than they. It's the main difference between a bond and an affliction is mechanical. With a bond, you get to invoke it, and it takes time and an action to invoke it to give you a benefit. With an affliction, it doesn't take time to invoke it, but the GM can invoke it anytime they want to also give you a downside. Afflictions are uncontrolled, bonds are controlled. They are both otherwise fairly similar in terms of they are a thing that is about your character in the world. Examples that my character's bonds and afflictions are I am famous on Earth. I can build it. I have the technology. Like, those are two bonds. An affliction I have is never miss. Never miss. That is a thing. He can't miss. He has a bond, for example, saying that he must get his old life and family back. He has an affliction saying he is inseparable from his family. Now, bonds and afflictions also are assigned points as to that is fairly arbitrary, but it's still like relative to each other. How powerful and how strong are these bonds and afflictions?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the short and sweet.
So what bonds and afflictions boil down to is that they're the handles for you to interact with other characters. It can be really boring just to like say, well, I'm going to spend aspect 5 and you're going to spend aspect 5. We're just going to punch each other for a while. If you have like a bond or aspect, then you can start. You have leverage in the negotiation, basically, and that's what they're all about.
Exactly. How do we think that they worked well? Another interesting thing about bonds is it also afflictions that are in terms of creating an anchor, or just
only
bonds?
Bonds can be used with an anchor.
Yeah, you can only create an anchor, sort of like imbue an object or person or being with your influence, and it then acts as sort of something that you can act through. You can only do that if you have a bond that matters with it. And
which I feel like we were fairly liberal with in our play.
I legitimately didn't know that for a while.
I was confused about that point for a while.
Yeah. Zen, you had most of the time, I think you used your bonds well when it came to doing that. Can you give us an example of what that looks like? Because I think that
so
some of the best examples.
Yeah, one of the things, well, the thing that my character was best at doing was turning things into anchors, having surrogate presences, basically, that he could co-opt at any time. So I used most of my bonds in that way to relate to the thing that I was creating into an anchor. That way you have this sort of shared connection with them. For example, I have a bond to remove the roadblocks of migration that got me the ability to bond with a migratory thing, being Jonah the space whale. So there is a lot of interpretation within the wording of these things as to how they relate to other things in the world.
I'd imagine it's similar, kind of in this terms of interpretation, to aspects from Fate. Like it's just, this is semi-related, so it'll work, kind of loosely. And I don't know how specific that is to the game, or if that's just how we interpreted it, and now some people might make the bonds, or some GMs and players might interpret the bonds and the relationship to anchors as having to be very aimed.
There's actually a part of the game rules that explain this. The more broad it is, the more time it takes.
I see.
So, like, in order to find Jonah, because he has such a broad bond, it took him a day to choose that specific whale.
Okay. That's really cool.
Personally, like, it's good to be brought up Fate. So Fate has this thing people have noticed where the more aspects you have, the less people remember them. And I feel like that kind of is true for bonds and afflictions as well.
Like, yeah, I was going to say that I think there are get too many points to distribute between bonds. Like, I feel like you get 27 or something, and I wanted like 8.
Yeah, you get more the more treasure you have too, which makes sense because you're supposed to get more specific bonds.
Yeah,
but oh my gosh, like I can't keep track of all this.
Yeah, like my bond, I'm famous on Earth, literally never came up.
Well, I have a bunch of bonds that never came up.
Like it's just there's too much.
I was actually going to have a TV crew show up at the church, but
That would be
because
awesome.
of your guys' actions, it didn't happen. But
Yeah, well,
there just wasn't
It's
time.
sort
There was
of
too
tied
many.
into. Yeah, it's sort of tied into him being followed around by the FBI at one point.
that's
too.
the one point that was kind of like, it was okay, but that it did come up there. But for a 2-point bond, it never really came up. And it's, on one hand, this isn't Golden's thing. This is mine too. This is just, how do I put this? I think having fewer but more important bonds would be helpful.
Well, I like the way that I like the fact that bonds are easy to keep track of because you as a player are responsible for keeping track of your bonds.
True.
And they're written on your character sheet, right? So you have a
Affliction,
way to interact
yeah.
with them. Afflictions, the GM is responsible for keeping track of them, and there's no upper bound. There is an upper bound. You can have 27 afflictions plus however many wounds you can have, right?
Mhm.
That's the maximum number.
So like,
if
Come
you were to
on,
have
27.
20,
32.
you could have 27. Okay, if you were like a 5 treasure, you could have 32. Plus, then you get wounds,
Okay,
right?
so
you're
37.
you could probably get up to like somewhere close to 40.
Yeah.
And then you can
Right.
take gifts that give you more afflictions.
Right, totally. So
It just,
it would be great if the system was like, hey, you get 8 points and you can put bonds into them, and then whenever the GM wants to fuck with you, they can give you an affliction, right?
yeah.
And then if you want to get rid of that, start a project, right?
Yeah, that could work. Or
I think-
have something be like, the GM gets to just write afflictions on your character sheet, and you negotiate is already a thing in Nobilis, but that is a part of your character sheet that they get to write on. And it's not really that they're putting on your character sheet; it's that's there to remind you that that's a thing that they can do.
right. Totally.
That would be good.
It's just too many. I would
Yeah.
say maybe 3 or 4 because I really like Fate, and then a bunch of ones that you can just write down your character sheet but don't have any mechanical meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I guess would be level 0.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, would it make sense in how we're talking about this to combine bonds and afflictions into the same thing? There is something that the player is responsible and the GM can invoke.
I don't
there's
see
a
why not.
downside to every bond.
not really because of the whole way it affects the action economy. We didn't
Well,
see
if
that
it's
here, but
if it's being used against you negatively, I think the ranking just
You could flip it,
screws
and
with you
so
instead,
every
yeah.
time you could have it where it flips, where every time you invoke it, the next time you invoke it using an action, next time it gets invoked for free. So it could effectively flip between
Mhm.
what a bond looks like and what an affliction looks like.
yeah, and then there's some give and take currency between the GM and the player.
And some
That's
direction.
interesting.
Because the GM can, instead of looking at all of the afflictions, the GM can look at the bonds that are like, okay, which ones are my turn to use? Then I'll use them.
it needs
Kind of like how fate points flips sometimes.
it needs some kind of other system on top of it
Yeah.
for sure.
It's also just I just found it hard to understand. During character generation, I literally I was like, well, I know that I treated them like aspects and then just randomly assigned whether they were bonds or afflictions because I couldn't wrap my head around the definitions in the book.
Mhm.
And so I just I wrote down a bunch of aspects that my character had, and then I made the first 3 bonds and I made the last 4 afflictions and was like, let's
Mhm.
figure it out in
But here's the
play.
thing, right? If we decide to slow down the pace of the game,
Mm-hmm.
then I would look at the afflictions and use them as flags to generate play. Matt wants to be haunted. Let's bring some ghosts in.
Right,
Yeah.
totally.
Spencer, you
Like-
want to see your character's family. Let's bring them in.
Yeah. There's always a sharp weapon or object nearby is one of mine. That could be amazing.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be one I can wield. It has to be one that could hurt other people just because they're near me.
you wake up one day and you realize that spike traps are popping up all around you for some reason.
That's
Uh,
amazing.
But so they're
So
great
it's-
for that. But the more focused you get on a project, the harder it is to throw them in without ruining the coherence of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that another thing that's this may be what you were saying, Will, but like, is it weird that there are both bonds and afflictions and projects?
I feel they could be merged. I don't know if it would be good.
You could have a bond.
It could be.
Like it would be interesting to see if there was a way to write them on your sheet in the same way,
because
where it's like, hey, once it's up to 5 points, it resolves.
I agree. These things are all part of the same system, but projects are how bonds and afflictions get added to your character sheet.
Mm-hmm. Or taken off. You could have a project
or
to
taken
remove
off.
the action.
Yeah, I think there's something that we could spend a lot more time discussing in terms of bonds and afflictions is if we could improve it, what would an improved version look like?
It would probably look a lot like estate properties.
Yeah, let's talk about estate properties.
That's a hell of a segue.
Hey.
Yep.
So estate properties.
What are estate properties?
Estate properties are bonds and afflictions that apply to your estate instead of you as a character. They help tell us things that your estate does and help tell us what is it about cats that make them cats, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the core concepts of your domain, I guess.
As we talked about before, estates are things that are defined by your character. Your character as a Nobilis defines their estate, not the other way around, unless you wanted to. But they can also change through play, through projects, or through interaction with your estate, or other characters acting on your estate. In fact, erasing estate properties, breaking them, is the correct way for Excrucians to try and destroy an estate. I mean, in our game, they just kind of bypassed the whole thing and killed the Imperator with a knife.
Right.
But the normal way is to wrote it.
Right. Yeah, like normally
it was a special knife that cut meaning away from the
Right. And like also it's a way for if we had gone more in the direction of like inter-nobilis politics, right? Or inter-familia politics, right? Like your rivals go after your estate. That's a thing that they do.
Yes.
And there's specific mechanics which we made use of like in different ways to help us with that. So like the nettle right, which we ended up using, I think, to challenge bonds and afflictions and break them in order to like gain more power. I think you can, and Will, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you can actually use them to like break estate properties and then draw power from that as well.
I think you're correct. Also, you can just do favors for your estate to strengthen them, and then you get MP.
Oh, yes. For those watching and who aren't familiar, your estate is both completely bent to your will and also its own entity that can do its own thing. So you can do favors for it, and it will repay you. It's very difficult to understand. It's fluid like that. I have a question though. How important and how useful are the points next to the estate properties? Because I don't think we really used it very often, and I can't think of many situations where we would.
They're important when you apply them to things with your enchantments, because they become bonds and afflictions on their character sheet. And the rating tells you the auctoritas that's provided against miracles. So if someone wants to do a miracle on your estate, so let me alt tab over here. If they want to make people standing in place, they'll need to have at least one strike, or else no miracle will take effect. So that's why they have a rating. They also provide auctoritas.
So it's like how strong those definitions are and how hard they are to break.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's miracle armor.
I see. I did not know that. And considering that our estates weren't really directly attacked often, that would be why I never saw it.
Right.
I mean, there's just a lot of mechanics that we didn't use in this game. But there's a whole section for that.
Totally.
Yes.
I would say like estate properties are one of the, because having played 2E, estate properties are one of the main things that are different in this game and new in this game, and I really enjoyed them. I intentionally made a high persona character so that I could engage with those mechanics a lot because I found them really, really interesting. And I'd love to, I would have loved, if we were playing for longer, for Phineas to die, I create a new character who is the power of dinosaurs and written completely different estate properties. So I considered at one point, right? I ended up writing down hungry and primitive for one of the properties that dinosaurs have as an estate. And I considered at one point writing down like ancient and wise, which would be like valid, right? Like that's not an invalid definition, but it completely changes the way that you play them.
Do you have were destroyed by a meteor by meteors? Because you could add that and then use that property to destroy everything with meteors.
Yeah. Well, I ended up doing that with Extinct on Earth, right?
Yeah.
I just write
There was
down
a moment.
dinosaurs are delicious, and
Totally. Right. Yeah. Like there's so much good stuff there, and it creates like I think it's a really good improvement just because it's fun. It's a fun mechanic to engage with.
Yeah.
Persona is it's an entirely new stat and it's really enjoyable. But it also allows you to just run characters for longer, right? Like you can have more engagements with the same concept and not be tied in.
I agree. I honestly think the estate properties are amazing. The point thing I wasn't sure about, and now it makes sense to me. But in terms of in terms of language, you take a concept, you define it with several descriptors, then you take that descriptor away from the original what it was describing and have it isolated and use that to apply it to a different thing, whatever you're using a miracle on, and then you say what that new interpretation is, which is just amazing.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about the mechanics we've mentioned thus far, and there's another one called Skills and Passions, all of them sort of work together to give you the tools to wring every little piece of flavor you can out of your character. Like there's so much that it allows you to do, and just the ideas pinging off the sheet. I find that to be one of the more amazing aspects of how this game works.
Yeah, you're never out of ideas for what to do. You're just questioning which one will result in the least amount of chaos. Yeah.
Right. So let's move on. The more interesting thing, also you asked about what those dots are for. So estate properties are also arguably your Imperator's bonds and afflictions. So by changing your estate properties, you are also changing your Imperator.
Huh.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
That makes sense. I mean,
it
because
does.
they are the conglomeration of all of the PC notables.
Right. So because you made your Imperator, hungry and primitive,
Umaya is hungry and primitive. Yeah.
Umaya is hungry and primitive. Yeah. If you make Umaya become ancient and wise.
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's good. That I think Nobilis does a really good job of basically making all of the mechanics a signal to the players and the GM about what you're interested in thematically exploring.
Oh, totally.
Right, projects, bonds and afflictions, estate properties, skills and passions, all of that stuff is hey, this is what I want to explore in my game, and let's figure out how to bring all this stuff together.
Speaking of which,
and they are one more thing, they are mutable. Every piece of that can be changed with a little bit of work.
Right. So I do think there's a question here about whether there's just too much of that kind of stuff. But that might be an end of stream conversation. Will,
the thing
sorry,
is that as sloppy as it is, you need that sloppiness. If these things lined up perfectly, that would remove a lot of the negotiation.
Oh, definitely, 100%.
So it's kind of like Jenna made this perfect, beautiful RPG system and then smashed it with a sledgehammer just to give players something to do.
It's like art. It's like if you're looking at someone craft and sculpt a perfect pottery jar, and they're on display in front of everyone, and then they take a giant sledgehammer and smash it, and then they put the sign there saying that's what it is the display.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's really good, but I think I agree. Clean cut for something like this wouldn't work. However, I think the discussion that probably could be its own 4-hour long video would be how much and where would some sweeping up be more helpful than hurtful.
Yeah. Other games like that she's been in have the same thing, like Weapons of the Gods, Exalted. If these systems she makes appear to have flaws, but the flaws are also features, and
Mhm.
Yeah. They're more
then
like preferences.
the more obsessive compulsive you are, the more painful it is, but it's still fun.
Right.
Yeah. So jumping straight to skills and passions.
Well, also let's talk a little about creating your Imperator.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we basically just each of us took turns saying things that were true about our Imperator. Did you guys like that feeling?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was good. Is this something that was like your thing or from the system?
This is from the system.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it was good. Umaya became very interesting. We again, it wasn't super apparent because we didn't spend that much time with our Imperator, but in a slower game, in like a more
Yeah.
day in the life of a power type of thing, it would have been really awesome.
Because like going back to like setting expectations in CareGen, like we had expected that the status quo would be you guys going out and stealing things for your Imperator, which not
Mhm.
happened once.
No. Well,
Yeah.
we went on that shopping
It
spree.
was like, yeah, there was a 2-minute aside.
I mean,
Yeah.
I had time
The
for
main
the side.
the main focus of the game that we initially started with became a montage which we didn't even do anything like as players during,
Right.
Mhm.
which is shows you how much things change in terms of initial expectation versus actual play.
Mhm.
But it
Yeah.
was still useful for me knowing what you guys thought would be cool.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So yeah, let's move on. Skills and passions.
Yes. This is the start of our like directly. This is our mortal stuff that Bonds and Afflictions is mortal partially, but cannot be and can be miracle
It's not
as well.
mortal / miracle. It's but it is about having supernatural power.
Yeah.
Like
And then
the witch had bonds and afflictions before she became the Bane, but a normal person would not have these.
yeah. But then
Mhm.
skills and passions are like this is just your regular stuff.
Yeah, this is your regular stuff. This is how people get things done.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting because I think this brings on the. It's not just that Nobilis has a large scale; it's that Nobilis has a very, very wide range of scale. It
Mhm.
goes from omnipotent to everyday stuff and everything in between. Um,
Yeah,
and that's really interesting because most
Mhm.
games are one or the other.
it's also like good for me because of the way that it defines actions. It's like I don't have to decide what they're trying to do. I just have to decide how badly they want it. And
Mhm.
it just makes it so much easier as GM
Mhm.
because I don't have to decide like oh, they're gonna convince you to do something. They have to use words. I have to say like they're trying to be impressive. Lord Entropy wants to be impressed.
Mhm.
Impress him.
Mhm. How much did you like? Did you build full character sheets for most of the
Oh
NPCs,
no,
like the noble ones?
I only created 2 of their highest stats, and I created their bonds and afflictions, and that was it.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, and I created their state properties,
Okay. Yeah.
but only if I thought you would actually interact with them. So
Mhm.
birds has estate properties, and Tartnap the Pishdom has estate properties, and I had them for Lord Entropy. I also figured them out for his buddies because I was going to have Desecration show up in your church, but we didn't have time for that.
Mhm.
Um,
That would have been a good scene, though.
Desecration. Yeah.
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 Well,
Okay.
I mean, you gave out all those business cards, so it's really easy to find you.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I
looking over passions and skills. It's really interesting to see just how like this is your mundane stuff, especially with how our game turned out near the end. Because during the very end of our game, it was impossible to do a mortal action that you didn't have a skill in, due to concepts that involved that dying out, due to basically a lack of willpower. People no longer did things that they weren't already pre-inclined and good at doing. And that's really interesting, especially considering that my character had a skill of lying. He had skills in business, lying, and engineer, all at level 5. 5 was the max. And so he lied a lot, especially near the end when, without literally using magic, he couldn't tell the truth. He literally couldn't tell the truth, and that's really interesting.
I think skills and passions are basically and superior attributes, which none of us had, but basically are just like magical powers that you can have in a mundane way. Like they basically operated with the cleanness that I wanted Bonds and Afflictions to operate with. Like I understood exactly what they were. I understood how to use them in game. It's easy to wrap your head around. And then we got to Bonds and Afflictions, and I was just like, I couldn't figure it out. And I really think that like passion, skills, and superior abilities, very, very cool. Like easy to use. It came up a lot. We all made use of them. And that's something that's new relative to the previous edition.
I wonder,
and I understand why she invoked it, because previously, like, it was like, are you doing a miracle? No, then your action is like, it works if the Hollyhock God said so.
Yeah. I wonder if for Bonds and Afflictions it would be simple, like a small change that might actually make things way easier. Split Bonds and Afflictions into two separate sections on the character sheet. That would help, I think, for just making it less messy. Yeah.
If you make them more complicated, though, it just makes it more complicated.
Maybe. I think it makes it more clear-cut. But anyways, does anyone else want to say anything else about skills and passions? As Zen, as your character Trek was never really a normal mortal, what were your skills and passions? Did you have any?
Pathfinding and persuasion were his skills.
Okay.
And he had a passion for comfortable anywhere he was, and a passion to... It literally says that he wanted to make change his anchor, but it was more about incorporating change into who he is, because wandering changes people, and he wanted that to be a one unit rather than two.
That makes sense.
I just want to point out that people make characters with only passions a lot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Interesting.
I guess that's, imagine if they as a mortal and they not doing miracles, if that's not important to them, doing mundane actions, then they could. And even then, passions can still work for that.
Yeah. I think I'm not as clear about the dividing line between like passions and projects, right? Like I had a passion that was, I want to know God, and then I literally was like, oh, well, I should just write a project that relates to that, which I did. And then every time I was trying to achieve that, I could invoke my passion.
Yeah.
But why not?
That's intended.
But why not? Again, like, why not just make them the same thing, right? If they're going to be binded together anyway.
Well, because you have a limited number of passions, but you don't have a limited number of projects.
And if you mechanically linked them in some way, like if your project is based on a passion, there should be some better result or different kind of result from resolving that project. You know, either it's more powerful or it's more meaningful, maybe. But that's probably, that can't be really codified in the rules. It's probably just a style of play more than anything else.
Yeah, they're just entirely different systems from my point of view. But I understand how you could make the mistake. They're both flags to GM that you want to do something.
Yeah, I mean, they're entirely different systems. I agree. I like, and I'm not saying any of the systems individually is poor in any way. I like all of them individually. I just like,
there's just some
I
overlap.
think ultimately I ended up feeling like there are just so many of them, and they like Will, to your point, like they have overlap, and that's intentional as a game design thing because that's how Jenna designs games. But it did feel like there was just so much to keep track of.
Oh yeah,
and a lot of it did the same stuff.
Yep.
It felt somewhat redundant, and some overlap isn't bad, but redundancy when it comes to the GM having to manage stuff seems like it just wastes the GM's important time and energy.
Well, I will say that I never looked at your skills and passions except just curiosity. Like that wasn't something that I didn't act on anything I saw in there. It was just for flavor. Whereas if I look at projects, I'm like, I know that you're going to do these things because you've told me. I better have plans for that.
Right.
But as a counterpoint to it being a little messy and too many things to keep track of, and this is totally on the player, if they streamline it so that everything does sort of line up, you can definitely see the directions the character wants to go.
That's true.
So you can sort of map out what you want to do and how you want to push your character, and that will constantly remind you, no matter where you're looking on your information sheet.
Maybe this is something you could do with the character gen process. Like, you would make your passions and projects at the same time, and then it would say, like, for each thing you wrote down here, put 2 points into a passion and write down a project, and put the same number of destiny in it. And that would encourage them to be the same, and then if they diverged later on, and they probably would, that would just give more depth to the character.
Yeah, and it would show a lot more. It would keep track of some growth, I think, of your character, because the skills and stuff really don't change too much, and you can see how far you've migrated away from what you were as a mortal.
Maybe I would say something like change the rules about starting projects. So maybe you shouldn't even need to declare a project. You can just start putting points in when you do stuff. But like, that's such a pain in the butt to track. I don't know if I'm going to pursue this later, but let me just write down these points in the circle. Oh, GM.
Totally.
I decided
but, like again, you could conceive of a system where it's like you decide that your character wants to do a thing, you write down a new passion. At the end of a session, you go through your list, and depending on how many things, you write down an additional point in that passion. When that passion gets to 5 points, you've resolved it, and you write down a new passion with 1 point. Right? Like, like that's projects. That is what project is, but it just puts it on the sheet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
All
right. Do we want to talk about the mortal actions versus miracle actions, and how the differentiation between that and how the mechanics involving that affect play? Because I think you said, Matt, earlier that in a previous edition, at least, there weren't many rules for a mundane action. It was just, if you want to do a miracle, then that's where everything happens. But otherwise, it's just talking.
Fiat driven.
Yeah, basically. I really enjoyed the skills and passions. I really enjoyed mundane actions as a thing. I think it adds a lot to the game. It allowed us to engage in a mechanical way, using the like mundane properties that we had defined for our characters, right? So like Robert, the fact that your guy was a businessman came up a lot. The fact that my character was a priest, I was able to use mechanically in the game. And I really enjoy that. I'm not sure if that system wasn't there, we wouldn't have those things, but it gives us more incentive to get what we want using the tools that we have, right?
I agree.
Which I enjoyed. I really liked the system. Zen, I don't know what you thought about it because your character was so high concept.
Yeah, I had no problem with it, honestly. Engaging it didn't seem like there was any barrier to it for me because I'm a non-corporeal thing. But I was still able to engage with the system pretty easily.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it was important because it's It depends on the game you want to play, but for most of the games, I imagine with Nobilis, the mortal part of a noble's life still matters in some way. And I think this is how.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really cool. And due to in fiction, the differentiation between mortal and miraculous actions allow us to play baseball with the creator, which was really cool.
That was a good scene.
Now, my main question, Golden, is how good was the creator at baseball? Do they have any skills in baseball?
No.
Okay,
But
so
they had a
got wrecked.
passion about loving
Oh,
their
okay.
children.
Never mind. We got wrecked. Okay.
No. Didn't cheat.
It was a friendly game.
I'm not saying we got. I'm not saying she cheated. I'm just saying that she was.
I mean, she
good.
did split herself into 13 other copies, but that does not count as cheating.
Nope.
Yeah.
They all had the same skills.
Yep.
I think that it's interesting because actually, what's really interesting with this game is not just as a player how much do you want it, but as a character, the more you want something in terms of the higher rating your passion is, the better you'll do at it by default.
Mm-hmm.
Your level. If I have a level 5 skill in business, and you have a level 5 skill in wanting to do business and having never known nothing about it, you're on the same playing field as me, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, also, I just really love that movie Angels in the Outfield. So I'm from
Also
Chicago, therefore.
Yeah. The original Superman movie was the first Christopher Reeves one was filmed here in Calgary, and it's awesome. Just saying.
Yeah.
That's the only one I know about movies filmed here. There are probably many more.
Cool. All right, so let's see here. Next up is Miraculous Attributes and MP. What are Miraculous Attributes? I can't remember.
They're like the aspect and domain, persona, and treasure.
Oh, those.
Yeah. The most important mechanic in the game, and we haven't even talked about it yet.
It's like they have names for those? I thought they were just a pile of stats.
I looked up the thing, and they're called Miraculous Attributes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess those are pretty important. Like, you couldn't play this game without them.
Nope. So okay, definitions for the viewers at home. There are 4 stats in Nobilis. They are aspect, which is your miraculous ability to do physical things. So miracle punching, miracle outthinking a supercomputer, that sort of thing. There's domain, which is your power to manifest your estate directly, or destroy it, or change it. So creating sadism, domain miracle. There's persona, which is your ability to influence the properties of your estates. So those things you've written down. Dinosaurs are hungry and primitive. Sadism. What was the one you ended up at the end?
I got sadism punishes those who deserve it. Is what I changed it.
Which is great. So good.
Yeah.
And then, so persona is that. And then treasure is your ability to have anchors and control them and channel your power through them.
Yeah. These are the 4 most important stats on the character sheet. They take up a lot of space. It's pretty obvious that they're really important looking at the sheet.
Mm-hmm. And then miracle points are basically instead of so you have a level in your stat, and then on top of that you have a number of points that you can spend. Rather than having dice, Nobilis is a resource conservation game. So you pick things that you care about and you spend points on those. And if somebody else cares about something more and is willing to spend points on it and you don't care about it that much, then you kind of just let them win.
Yep.
And that's kind of the main resolution mechanic for miraculous actions.
Yeah, it's just kind of a bidding system. Like how much, whoever bids the most wins, but then everyone else loses.
It's a very advanced version of Everyone's John, right?
Basically.
You just put your points in and hopefully you got enough.
Yeah. So, basically when you want to cast a miracle, you figure out what type it is. Then you figure out what level of that type you have. If I want to cast an aspect miracle, well, I have an aspect of 4. So by default, I can, without spending any points, cast a level 4 or lower miracle. If I want to cast a higher level miracle, miracles are rated from 1 through 9, then I think 0 through 9 actually, then you can spend extra points to upgrade just for that one cast of the miracle You can spend points 1-for-1 to upgrade it. There are some limits to that in terms of spending a bunch of points, but effectively that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you
The
tell the
strength.
GM what you want to do. He looks at the list. He tells you what it's going to cost you, and there you go. So this is kind of one thing. It's like the GM is going to be different from each game with Nobilis. So what stats, what attributes the GM allows you to use at what level is going to be different from every game with Nobilis. It's just going to be a fact because there is some interpretation required here.
Yeah.
Like it can be a game where you just tell the GM what you want to do and he tells you what to roll. But also it can be a game where you tell the GM what you're willing to spend, and then the GM can arbitrate from there.
Mm-hmm. I think this works really well. I think that, like most of Nobilis, if not just the entire game, what this looks like in play will drastically depend on your GM and your group. I think that the scope of the miracles from level 0 through level 9 can drastically change. The easiest one to explain is aspect, because that's the most tangible miracle type. Difficulty 0 is called peak performance, and effectively you want to do what you would normally do, except that it always goes easily and smoothly, and it doesn't tire you out. And effectively you do it better. It is more like being Batman. Like he's normal, but he's better.
Right, he's just the best at everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is aspect 0 is by definition actually Captain America. He's the best a human could possibly be.
He's probably like aspect 3 or 4. Actually,
I was going to say,
if you wanted to get rid of skills and persona passions, this is where you put them. You would get rid of skills entirely. You just write down business, aspect 2, and there you go.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, like pulp heroism is difficulty 2, and that is effectively this puts an ordinary person on the level of an amazing athlete. Like that is probably the Captain America one I would suggest. Then, or maybe Captain America, that would be Batman, because he's technically still human and doesn't enhance himself. Difficulty 3 would be inhuman perfection, where you're like enhanced in some way. Level 4 is divine force, where you just become like things start snowballing at that point. Level 5, legendary master. Your body becomes light. You have completely conscious control over every muscle system and everything. You can run on top of grass. You can leap 50 yards, not feet, yards, and land easily from practically any fall. Like it's just.
That's like Kung Fu. That's Kung Fu master
starts
level.
becoming. Yeah, that's like Superman.
It's
pretty much.
It's every martial arts anime. It is
and they're shown an anime character. Level 5, level 6, you become Superman, unstoppable power, casually invincible, exert as much force as you need to, as the plot demands. That's the Superman level, and that's level 6 out of 9. So then you get to fairy tale feat. You don't have to listen to reason anymore. Becoming a storybook character. You can do anything that you can explain away as a use of a natural human ability.
Right.
For
so
example,
this is like, yeah.
You can drink a small lake. You can blow a house down. You can surf on sound waves. You can stuff a pair of gazebos into your pocket is one thing that it says here. It's still you that has to do stuff, but you can do things that don't make sense. As long as it can make literally the barest amount of sense in terms of, I have to breathe air into my lungs and blow it out to blow this house down. That's it. And then
I also love that level for like that's the point where they're like spatial laws of reasoning don't matter anymore. Like,
yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Physics starts breaking down here.
Yeah. It's not the classic fairy tales that it's like the weird, like really young children's like storybook fairy tales that are just very, very strange. Those kind of fairy tales are.
It's like the GM's tool, like when the player tells you something complete bullshit, like, okay, but it's fairy tale level. Or like it comes down to how good the player is at description.
Yeah.
If they can't describe it, then maybe it's a higher level.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing is difficulty 8. This is difficulty 9 is the highest. Difficulty 8 is still technically the same level as difficulty 9. Difficulty 8 is world-shaking skill. You can do anything, and doesn't have to be local. The world is your playground. This is Bruce Almighty. This is lassoing the moon with your hands. This is it describes shooting down a star with your gun. Figure out the acoustics so you can talk casually with someone on the other side of the world without anyone in between overhearing. Yeah, you can sustain these as long as you like. It's totally insane. Yeah. Level 9 is that same stuff of level 8, only once you do it, you have mastered the technique, and you know how to do it forever. Protected by level 4 Octora test, but still, basically forever.
Yeah. Well, it's for the rest of the story. Technically, according to the rules, you can do it for the rest of the story.
That's true.
Which is like a defined length of narrative time
That's
in the
true.
game, without being a defined length of time in a literal sense.
Yes, you can do it.
Not linear time, but
yeah,
yeah, you can do it for the rest of the arc, basically.
It's longer than one session, shorter than a campaign, probably.
Yeah. So that's the most tangible and easy to understand example of the broad range of scope between like Golden Superman, Superman Prime or whatever he's called, and like not even Batman. Robin is probably what the level difficulty 0 would be. Like Robin in training.
And if there was the power of superheroes, try a domain 6 or 7 miracle just to make Superman.
Superheroes, like we would just make all sorts of things like are inside all of us, or like always wear masks. Yeah, like when the world's in trouble, everyone pulls open their shirt and becomes a different superhero.
Yep.
Why are there so many phone booths?
Everyone has cell phones, but there's still phone booths.
Make that a thing. Superheroes must change inside a phone booth.
Yeah.
Superheroes have secret identities that they protect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how did you guys feel about having to spend MP in discrete quantities? Like,
I honestly found it really interesting. I think it makes having a higher level aspect or higher level stat much more valuable than it would be otherwise. So when you spend miracle points, you can only spend them in certain amounts. 1, 2, 4, or 8. 8 is a lot. The max you can have, I believe, is 10. Yes. Max you can have at a time in each individual pool is 10. But if you spend 8, you will take a deadly wound, just because effectively it's the I'm channeling too much power type of wound. It's the it's effectively a
it's like the law of unintended consequences, or like karma.
It's the collateral damage,
right? Your reach exceeds your grasp, and something bad happens to you. As a result.
Do it. You still cast the miracle. You just also get hurt in the process.
Yeah, totally.
And I think in terms of how it affected gameplay and decision making, it's really interesting because it's not just I can spend 1 more point to beat you. It's I have to spend four more points and take a wound to beat you. Yeah, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe losing's better.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting because it helps strongly avoid kind of just like one-upping people, because you can't one-up when you're spending miracle points. You go up by 1, and then by 2, and then by 4, and then by 8.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of how it affects gameplay,
yeah, I like that. It's one of the few things in Nobilis where there's a very strong player constraint, and I really enjoy that. I think it's a really good mechanic by forcing you that, like, if you want to escalate, you have to escalate by a lot, right? Like you can't. There's no incrementalism in the game. It's, are you committed or are you not?
Yeah, you could go medium in, or you could go all in, or you could barely go in at all, and that's effectively it. You have 4 set amounts of points you can spend.
Totally.
So
it's also interesting the way it affects with the Octortas. Like, if you have a level 5, what's the word? Start with a bond and affliction. If you have a level 5 affliction, that can only be overcome if someone uses a word of command. So it's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Word of command for those watching is what the term is for spending 8 miracle points and taking a wound doing it.
Mm-hmm.
so it's like kind of a reward for taking such a. Because if someone breaks that affliction, if they spend the word of command to break that, you're going to take a deadly wound. You know?
Yeah.
I mean,
And then
Right.
gain level 5 affliction yourself.
Speaking of taking a deadly wound, should we talk about wounds?
it's almost like we put these in a good order.
It's almost like we talked about this beforehand and planned it out.
Yeah, interesting.
Whatever. Yeah, must be coincidence. Wounds. I really like the wound system. Because the wounds aren't just wounds, they are afflictions as well. I think that the fact that they are tied together make them very interesting. The fact that they are still stakes to wounds. It's not like you just get wounds and just the consequences happen. You can still die from wounds, and there are interesting consequences. I say this as someone who I think once had a serious wound. Every other wound I've ever had was deadly, most of which were due to my own words of command.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like we're doing more slice of life games.
Oh, yeah,
might have more surface wounds, but
I agree.
Totally.
Yeah, we
But yeah,
played pretty high stakes for this.
you're like, I think you're fat. Oh, I got to write down the surface wound. I don't think I'm fat. I check out surface wound. Not being fat is my affliction. Okay.
Right.
Affliction feels bad, man.
Yeah. I mean, to explain a little bit further for the there are different wound levels, but then each of them like has a written language statement that can be anything, and it's just defined by the GM what it is. So like there was a point where I used a word of command to like blow the moon back into position after it was out of orbit. And Golden gave me the wound driven to acts of hubris, which was great. I loved it. And like we were able to bring it up in play so much after that. That was really, really fun.
Yeah. Doing a word of command, any deadly wound actually changes you. And that's important because whenever a high level miracle happens, being it to you or by you, that means that something is going to change. If it's being done to you, either the change is the command happens, or the change is I take a deadly wound to resist it, and therefore something in me changes. And I like that. It leads to the not really when a dice is rolled something happens, but when a miracle is cast, something always happens, especially when it's a higher level. Really, that's when it's.
Yeah, it ensures that something else is going to change based on your action.
I think that's also really useful because if it wasn't the case, it is possible, because right now it's literally impossible, and I like that it's impossible to get into situations where someone, be it a GM or a player, spends 8 miracle points for a word of command, and after all of the negotiating and stuff is done, nothing happens. And you'd be like, well, I lost all of that.
Right.
Like, yeah.
I think
action was for naught.
I may have done the healing wrong. I think the rules in this part are like the healing rules are kind of not there.
I was looking at them a couple times because I got Durant, and I think that you were right on them.
But like, think of it this way: if a wound gives you an affliction, in order to heal that wound, you have to overcome the affliction. Overcoming an affliction gives you a wound. So, is it possible to heal it without infinitely creating more wounds for yourself?
That's interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah. I didn't think about that. I was more thinking, because I thought it just kind of healed automatically over time.
Yeah, it does too, but like the fact that it gives you an affliction and the fact that afflictions sustain themselves with Auctoritas, like give me a catch 40. What is it? Catch 42?
22.
I don't know if
22.
Yeah, I don't know if they're meant to be treated like the rest of the afflictions simply because of the way the character sheet is laid out. Because you have a wound section here, which I imagine is where you'd write the wound afflictions separately from the other bonds and afflictions.
Oh, I think you might be right that I'm right, but I think that they shouldn't be called afflictions.
I agree.
Mhm.
They can be called something like they just like passions and skills and estate properties and bonds and afflictions. They can be another thing like that with a different name.
Just call them wounds.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Which
I
is
think-
what the character sheet does. I mean, it says
Right.
wounds.
yeah,
there
just
with
not
the-
the
But yeah,
book.
I mean, while we're talking about some of the like weaknesses of the character sheet, which have come up before, and like the fact that there are different words in the book and different words on the character sheet, I find very, very confusing. Right? Like
True.
you have two divine health levels. It says in the book, but nowhere on my character sheet do I see 2 divine health levels.
Nope,
Right.
I see.
I see 2 deadly wounds, and so
Yeah.
like there's some weirdness stuff in there that like again just like there's a little too much. I love this game. It is one of my favorite games. There's just a little too much in the book, and it needed in like just like another edit.
Yeah, to be fair, and I agree with you. I can't imagine playing this game with as a group of people who've never played Nobilis before, with no one having played
Yeah.
it. That sounds like
Oh yeah, yeah. You need
like
the oral
honestly, it would be
tradition
like a
passed
disaster.
down.
Right.
Yeah,
Also,
Because-
I'm going to point out that I'm pretty sure that this might be related to the development hell.
Oh, very
This game
much
went
so. I
through?
almost brought it up.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Nobilis, when this edition of Nobilis was coming out, what was the story specifically again? I just know it like had some serious difficulties.
Well, among other things, the artists, all the art had to be replaced because it turned out to be stolen.
Right.
And
Mhm.
then after the distribution started, the company took all the money, and so they printed the books. They didn't print the books. So the company was also providing editing and development and
And
production.
chose not to. Yeah,
Yeah.
And
Considering
bunch of
the
jerks.
hell that this game went through in development,
totally.
it is itself a miracle that it is as consistent and concise as it is.
We have a character sheet, guys. And that's all
Yes.
I'm saying. It's
Yeah,
That is-
the game exists, and that is a
there's
miracle.
problems,
You're right.
but it's a miracle
I know.
that it exists.
Yeah.
Totally, and I love this game. I'm being hard on it because we're explicitly having a discussion around like
We're
whether
criticizing.
it's good or not. But
Yeah.
like this was so much fun. I loved the last edition. This edition is super fun. Like it's great.
Yeah. We are intentionally nitpicking.
Yeah.
Okay.